Hey guys, and welcome to another Sonically Sound video. Today we're going to look at how to mix drums, specifically in this video, snare. This video will show you a basic way on how to mix a snare, my go-to mix if you will. Just remember that music is a matter of opinion, so I'm not saying this is the only way to mix a snare drum, I'm just saying this is my way to mix a snare drum, and hopefully this will help you in how to mix your snare drums. In this video, I'll be using Logic Pro 10 version 10.4.4. So if something doesn't look right to you at your setup at home, you might need to update. So you'll notice I have two snare tracks here. One's labelled snare top and one's labelled snare bottom. This is because when it comes to mixing a snare drum, you can mic it in two positions. You could put one mic on the top of the snare and one mic at the bottom. This is because the snare produces different sound from different places of the drum. The top will have a very snappy sound and the bottom will have a very low and rattly sound. So sometimes it's better to mix them together. But in this video we're going to look at snare top specifically, and we might look at snare bottom in another video if I run out of time. So as usual, when I mix an instrument, I want to solo it and then find a part of the song where it's playing really prominently. So first we're just going to find a loop for it. So that's good there. So the first thing I will do when I mix is I'll open up compression. So what you do is you go to your channel strip here, and this little line here will open to a compressor. If you haven't watched my video on compression and you don't understand how this works, I recommend you watch that video first so that when I start talking about this, it doesn't seem so complicated or confusing. For those of you who have watched my video, I like to use Studio FET. Now this is my personal taste, so if you guys want to use your own one or you want to experiment, because this is just my taste and I'm just showing you an example of how to use it. This isn't the only way to do it. Obviously there are other options. So I like to select graph because then I get to see what goes over the threshold and I get a visual idea of what's being reduced as well. So first I'm just going to hit play. So you see that's compressing it very hard. The mic is probably very close to the snare as well, so it's getting a very loud sound. We want the actual ratio to probably be quite hard because this is a rock song, so drums get compressed quite hard in rock songs. If this were a jazz song, maybe it'd be different, or a swing or blues song where there's more dynamic range. In this video we're doing a rock song, so I'm going to compress it kind of hard. I'll maybe do 4, 4.5, 4.6. And we're going to want to bring that compression way down because it was being compressed pretty hard earlier when it was a soft ratio. So now with the hard ratio, it's going to be even more intense. So we want to put it up here. Let's see how that sounds. So that sounds quite good. I like that it's compressing it kind of hard in the really hard hits and it's just really pushing it down. It's kind of what you want. You want sort of a level sound. In a rock song, you want a snare to have a level sound throughout. So that sounds quite nice. It's really punchy. It's really cutting through. So that's what I do with the compression. I tend to leave the attack and release settings alone because the ones that are set to are fine. So that's how I would use the compressor on that. So the next thing I always do is EQ. So you open the EQ box here and the parametric EQ will open up. If you don't understand how the EQ on Logic Pro 10 looks, or you don't understand EQ at all, then I really recommend you watch the video I made about EQ, specifically Logic's EQ, and that should help you understand what's going on when I'm using this. So with the snare, there's actually quite a lot of frequencies that we want to keep and we want to hold the sound to, especially if we're only miking the top. Sometimes if you're mixing the bottom, you could afford to not boost some of the sounds on the top mic because you have the low end on the bottom. But in this instance, we're going to mic it as if it were just a top mic on its own with no bottom mic. So we want a bit of the bottom. We want that kind of boom sound because it is quite boomy still. We want the snap of the stick hitting the skin because that will make it really prominent in the mix. And we also want some of the high end because it has that rattle of the actual snare rattling. So let's have a look. So if you've been watching my videos on how to EQ kick mics, you'll notice that the boom I'm trying to pick up on this snare is a higher frequency than the boom I was picking up on the kick drum, and that is because the snare is a higher sounding instrument. It's kind of mid-range. So that's good because we want the boom from the kick, but if it's exactly the same, there's no differentiation. So this is fine. I've kind of got it at around 200 hertz. I might boost it a bit more, but we'll just see how it sounds like this. So that's quite good. It's got the punch that we want, and it's kind of coming through. The next thing we want to look at then is getting the snap from the drumstick hitting the skin. So let's look at that. So yeah, that sounds pretty good where it is around kind of 1720 hertz. I've got it quite low because it's pretty loud already. I just want to enhance it slightly. I'm not wanting it to be the only thing we hear. You're probably also noticing there's a bit of a ring. Snare is very prone to rings in the sound. That's because there's a metal ring surrounding the snare. So when you hit it, the skin is vibrating and therefore vibrating this metal ring, and metal will vibrate and make a certain noise. So you might have a really loud one. It might be a really quiet ring. So we'll have a look in this video, but you may want to completely remove it. Sometimes you might just want to leave it as is because it's not that intrusive. So I found one there. It's around 1K, and that's quite typical. One of the rings is normally at 1K. It's hard to say in too general terms because snares are so different. You notice I've gone very narrow because I want to get rid of just that frequency. I don't want to get rid of anything else. And I don't want to go all the way down. I don't want to go minus all the way down because there's still some nice frequencies in that area. We just don't want the ring. So I've removed that. You'll notice there are still some rings, and this is the problem with trying to EQ out all the rings. There's not just going to be one. Because of harmonics, there will be potentially two others. So you then have to locate all of those. And if you really want to do that, that's fine. If it's really intrusive, please do that. But if it's not that intrusive, I wouldn't spend too much of your time doing it because you'll find you'll remove one ring and then you'll hear the other one and then you'll try and do that and then you'll hear the other one, try and do that, and then it just goes on and on and on, and you're actually wasting a lot of time doing that, and it's very rarely intrusive. The next thing I'll do is just boost the high end, so get a bit more of that rattle. You'll notice a lot in this recording that there is a lot of band sound in this mic recording, and that's because it was all in one room, so it's going to be picked up. I wouldn't recommend trying to remove all of it because it's going to be played alongside the other instruments. So at the end of the day, you're going to remove the sound of the band so that it can be played with the sound of the band. So there's no need to waste your time removing that. Just try and enhance bits and maybe remove stuff if it's really in the way. So let's try and get that rattle sound. So I've found a bit of the rattle and I've just lightly boosted the higher frequencies with a high shelf. You'll notice as well I reduced some of that boom sound we were getting and also dipped a frequency because typically there's the boom sound and right next to it is a droney sound that might be a bit annoying. So I just reduced that and cut down the drone sound, and hopefully that will sound a bit more clearer. It seems quite good, and I'm quite happy with that sound. Just remember that actually if you're recording overheads, you'll get quite a lot of the snare sound in your overheads, so don't spend too much time getting the perfect sound for this. The mic recording the snare right next to it is specifically for the boom and the snap, and the kind of rattle and general sound really comes from the overheads, so we'll look at that in another video. So now that I've done the EQ for the snare, the next thing I like to do is panning and reverb. So in the last video, you know that I didn't pan or use reverb on the kick drum, and that's because it's a low frequency, so we don't need to make it directional. However, the snare is slightly higher, it's kind of mid-range to high range, so it's a lot more directional, and so panning is very important. I'll also put some reverb in for the very same reason. We'll start with panning, as that's more simple to explain. Basically, with panning, we want to figure out what perspective we want the listener to have the drums in. So there are two typical ways of doing it. One is the audience perspective, so we're looking at the drum set. That means you want the snare to be in the direction that the listeners will hear it. So when you look at a drum set as an audience member, you'll notice that the snare drum is slightly to the right. So that's what we're going to do here. Plus 15 or 20 is probably enough for the snare because it's not completely to the left, it's just slightly to the left. So you want to pan it around there, and that will give the right image that it's there. The other way of panning is from the drummer's perspective. Some people like to do the panning as if you're listening as the drummer. So this would just be the opposite way round. We want it a bit on the left side. So that would be the same, but it would be minus 15 or minus 20. Basically, don't go too intense with it, and just try and figure out what perspective you're going from. Don't have it all the way to the right or all the way to the left, because that will sound really disorientating for the listener. The next thing is reverb. Now, if you haven't watched my video on reverb, I recommend you do that now so that this all makes sense, because I won't explain it as clearly as I do in that video. So what I like to do for reverb is send it to a channel strip that's dedicated to reverb, and then bring in how much of the signal I want to have reverb, rather than putting reverb on the channel strip here, because it means I have less control of it. It also means I can send a bunch of instruments to one reverb so that it has a similar reverb sound and sounds like it's in the same room, so we can create a artificial space that all the instruments are in. The other reason people do that is because typically you'd only have a few reverbs in a live setup, and so all of the instruments get routed to only a few lists of reverbs. If you put a different reverb on every single channel, you'll find that you're going to overload your project, and it'll probably crash when it tries to play and stuff like that, and you don't want that. So we'll select send, and we go to bus, and we select bus 1, which is going to aux 1. When that happens, this channel strip, rather than being the master output, will be assigned to the bus 1 output, which means we can then look at what we do there. Now, aux 1 works exactly like the other channel strip. It has a compressor, it has an EQ, it has plugins you can put into it, and it works exactly the same. Now you can see I've already put a Space Designer plugin into it, and that's Logic's Reverb. So what you do is you keep it at Unity, you open up the Space Designer, and here you will have the Reverb plugin. Now you might look at it and think, this is very confusing, what do I do? And my other video will explain it very well, but very simply, you want dry to be all the way down to mute, and you want wet to be all the way up. Then in order to select a type of sound, you go to this, and you can select what type of space you want. So this is totally up to you, what kind of space you want the drums to be in. You can have a large space, medium space, small space, and then you get other unusual spaces. I quite like a medium space because it gives it a bit of wideness to it, but not too much. And then from medium spaces, you get different types of sounds. So you get, again, warp spaces, you get outdoor halls and plate reverbs, because some sounds might sound different. So you can pick room, and you'll see that it gives you the amount of seconds the reverb is, so how long you want it to be. It's typically set to ambience 1.8 is its automatic, but you might not want that. I quite like using hall, and I'll go between medium hall or nice hall or bright hall. Let's do bright hall for this example. Just remember, you don't have to pick one reverb. You can experiment with loads of them until you find one that has the right sound. So now that we have that, we can close the window. Now when I hit play, you'll notice it sounds no different. That's because I haven't actually sent any of the signal to the bus. And that is controlled over here where it says bus 1. There's a dial here. And if I grab it and push it up, you'll notice the level starts to increase. And this is how much of the snare signal we are sending to the reverb. So there I put it very high up so you could really hear it. But you don't really need to do that. Again, this is down to your choice, but for a rock song, it's probably not going to be like that. Sometimes I like to put reverb on the drums to create the idea that it's in a concert hall or a large venue, but sometimes it's just because it sounds nice. So we'll slowly start to increase the reverb sound and just hear what sounds good. So to me that sounds very good. I quite like the reverb on it, it's not too intrusive. Remember that you'll probably have to adjust the reverb when you mix it with the rest of the band because the actual sound of the reverb will drown out. You've then also got this fader, which is your master fader for the reverb. So you might think, I really like the level I'm sending, but it's too loud in the mix. You can just turn this down. But we'll leave it at unity for now. Another thing I might want to do is EQ the reverb. So of course we've created a boost in the low end for the snare, and that's now coming through the reverb, and we probably don't want the low end in the reverb. So if I open this up, I'll activate the low cut filter and just kind of bring it up so it's cutting a lot of the low end, because we just want high end and mid range. And then we might want to do stuff like put a high shelf on it and boost that high end so we really get that airy sound from the reverb. So that sounds quite nice to me. I've cut a lot of the low end off and I've reduced a little bit around 1K, and then I've boosted up here because that's kind of the sound we want to hear. So once that's done, you've compressed this snare, you've EQ'd the snare, you've panned it in the orientation you want, and you've sent it to a reverb and mixed the reverb so it has a nice sound. There's not much else to it. So yeah, that's it. That's how you mix a top snare mic. I will do in another video how to mix a snare bottom mic, and then we'll talk about how to mix them together as one thing. But if you're just after how to mix a snare top mic, then there you go, that's how you mix it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and if there's a video I haven't covered or you'd like me to, put it in the comments below and I'll see if I get to it. I'm Sonically Sound, and until next time, have fun mixing.